I'm reading this morning from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to be a shepherd, my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so I may also go and pay him homage." When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them was the star that had been seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another way. This is Epiphany Sunday, the Sunday we share the narrative of the Magi, or as many of you know from a famous Christmas carol, the Three Kings. Our nativity scenes always include the three Magi, and I was reminded last week that something that I hadn't noticed, but then after I was told this, I got looking around and noticed that's pretty true, that in almost all of our nativity scenes, we have the three Magi, one camel. So I don't know whether or not in Bethlehem they had public transportation, or whether like we do carpooling, they did camel pooling, or that's just an oversight on our people who put together nativity scenes. But nonetheless, I think you'll find that to be the case most of the time. But nonetheless, the Magi, we'll find that our nativity scenes crowded into this small space alongside the shepherd and the sheep and the angels and Mary and Joseph, and of course, the baby. There's a problem here, though. We celebrate Epiphany 12 days after Christmas. The problem is, if you read or listen to most historical theologians, they're going to tell you that this event happened about 2 years after the birth of Jesus. So not only is it kind of strange that we put the Magi with their one camel in our nativity scenes, because they would not have been there, but that they are coming and represented to us in that manner at all, because by that point, you kind of have to assume that Mary and Joseph are not still in the stable after 2 years, right? By then, surely they found some decent housing. In fact, if you recall what I just read from the New Revised Standard Version, it actually says, on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary and his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. So they had relocated. But regardless of where they found Jesus and when they found Jesus, these Gentile Magi from the east finished what it was they had set out to do. Like one of our favorite Christmas hymn goes, "Come, let us adore him." And that's what the Magi did. They persevered and finished their calling. And so the question that I asked this morning, how about us? This is the very thing I want to share this morning, a learning from the narrative of the Magi is about perseverance. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and lecture to you about things that are unfinished, or try to pile guilt upon you about all the things at home that are unfinished, or in church, or in your individual life, because I would be a hypocrite. Because if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you there's a whole list of stuff at home that I've either started or need to start that I haven't finished yet, and perhaps never will. Anybody else there with me? So, I'm not going to do that, but what I am going to do is tell you that as faithful disciples of this Jesus Christ, we need to follow through on our intended good deeds. Our intended missions to our neighbors, our intended missions to the global community. I'm going to tell you that we as Christians must persevere by doing the right thing and doing it for the long term. I'm going to tell you that we are called by our confession of faith to follow this Jesus in a consistent way in all the situations of our daily life. Now I know that in our individual lives, and in our church life, perhaps in our business life, we're really good at getting things started. Whenever we start any kind of projects, everybody's all psyched up and ready to go. We're like a bunch of cheerleaders. Go team, go! And we start recruiting people to get in and help us out. But then, as it is, as human beings, there's always problems that arise, right? There's always stumbling blocks. There's always hindrances to whatever it is we decide we want to do. And whenever those things start happening, our passion for those missions, whatever they might be, evaporates. Our perseverance takes the train to the coast. Maybe those are the times we need to be praying to God to help us keep our enthusiasm from leaking away and our energy from failing, and knowing that our problems are there, but they may not be multiplied, that we can continue God's will. I think that one of the signs of maturing in your faith, your Christian faith as an individual or as a community of faith, is when you realize and accept that Christian life is not only a matter of excitement, but it's also a matter of commitment. It's a matter of perseverance. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Galatia, "So let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap it at harvest time if we do not give up." Or the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche described Christian life as a long and obedient in the same direction. You know, I think us postmodern people are so used to having everything done quickly and having everything at the tip of our hands that this idea of perseverance has almost escaped our vocabulary. And maybe it's not even in Wikipedia, who knows? We are so used to everything being done quickly. And we assume that everything can be done quickly and efficiently. We have attention spans that are very short, those 30-second commercials. Our reality is flattened by 30-page abridgments. Very few people read entire books. We read blogs and Reader Digest instead. Our patience grows thin quickly with our political leaders or coaches. Have one losing season, they got you out the door, especially if you're from Notre Dame. They have a terrible season, I guarantee you. You read the black and the blue and gold, they're ready to shove them out the door. We have a short span. The world is spinning fast in these magic fiber cables that interlock all the world, and we have everything out of our fingertips immediately. And so if it doesn't happen immediately, we're ready to bail. We just can't handle perseverance. Like you, I speak with a lot of other people outside of the church. People in the grocery store, people at the YMCA, people in the coffee shop. And the narratives I hear from these folks, for some reason, I guess I'm starting with this beard and stuff, I had that grandfatherly look. Do you have the same problem, George? People always want to talk to you?
No, they run the opposite.
He's got the white beard too, that's
They
why I
run the
love
opposite direction, George.
him. Opposite direction, George. But nonetheless, people always want to share, it seems people always want to share their narratives with me. And what I have found out is there is a great market for religious experience in our world. But there's little enthusiasm to have the patience to acquire it. There's an enormous opportunity for us Christians to share the good news. Great opportunity. I've shared with you before that only about 30% of the population of the United States even attends church on a regular basis. Great opportunity. But there's not quite as much enthusiasm to get out there and try to share that good news with those who don't have it. I kind of scratched my head. I had a funeral on Friday. Not a member of this church, not a member of Centenary Christian Church. It was someone from the neighborhood. And this someone from the neighborhood has either been to our food pantries or attended church at some point. And it was a suicide. And when people commit suicide, I'm aware of the fact, psychologically, it's because they have completely lost hope to even live in their life. So I've got to sit back and wonder, did I miss out something? Did I miss the opportunity to show somebody hope in their life? Because I was so busy that I couldn't really persevere with my faith to listen to them. Perseverance. There's a story in the Bible you may be familiar with, Simeon and Anna. The two people who in the temple recognize the presence of God in the infant Jesus. At the time they're getting ready to do the sacraments after the certain days when they do circumcision, etc. Simeon, we're told, had been looking forward to the consolation of Israel. That phrase implies that he is patiently waiting. And then there's Anna, 84 years old, and it says of her, never left the temple, but worshiped there with fasting and praying night and day. They had both signed up for the long haul. They were faithful until the end. Perseverance. Likewise, we have a model of perseverance from the Apostle Paul, writing as he drew near death. He says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now, of course, these words imply more than simply completing a mission. They speak of living a life of holiness, his entire life. They refer to the completion of the whole life of discipleship. Perseverance. Finding that life of discipleship is not easy, as we have faith projects thrown up to us. But it's often because of who we are in our world that we have this idea that our faith and those faith projects are 100-yard dashes, where in fact they are marathons. Where we think they're just a tourist jaunt to 2 weeks to Ireland, where they're actually a pilgrimage through all of the world. Now, I understand that along that way we have some shorter races that need to be ran en route, and sticking to that things that God has called us to do in small bites are important as the long one is. Not to let them impede our long journey. Perseverance. So this morning, I stand here in 2 pulpits in Indianapolis and know that we're beginning a new year. It's 2013. And so I think it's a good time as we begin a new year to think about what God is calling this church, what God is calling each one of us individually to do. About the mission our faith calls us to as a faith community and as individuals. What exactly is the mission of this church? I don't think we'll answer that this morning, but it's something you need to think about. But I am going to share with you that some outlines here from our Division of Homeland Ministries about being transformed, what congregations that are transformed look like, because that's what really happened with these 3 wise men. They were transformed enough that they traveled for a couple of years to see a baby. Huh? I mean, really, when you think about that, we already know the whole story, right? But think about, you don't know the whole story. Think about how crazy that sounds, that you traveled 2 years following a star to see a baby. Yeah, it really sounds kind of crazy. So there's some transformation going on there. So here's some things that our national office tell us to kind of look at to see whether or not we are really a congregation that is transformed. Are we intentionally trying to be transformed into doing God's work? Do we have an ongoing process? Is we discovering new places of ministry, leaving behind traditions that may no longer work, that are worn out, that are sacred cows that we need to find a new type of worship and new type of service? Are we rediscovering things that we have done in the past and refocusing on our spiritual disciplines? Has a congregation acknowledged that it needs to be transformed? Are there things going on that tell us we need to transform ourselves? Is the church actively and intentionally doing what Christians should do? Are we reaching out beyond our community right here in this church to others? Daring hospitality, doing something that has never been done before? Are we seeing beyond those 3 B's? Building, budgets, and behinds the pews. Do we have a vision that is more than just about today? Are we focused on the spiritual gifts that God has given us? Some things for us to think about as church and to think about individually. Perseverance. Well, by now, most of you know my story of perseverance. Last Ash Wednesday, or actually the day before Ash Wednesday last year, I was at the YMCA working out, and a couple of very fit middle-aged women were harassing me. And I said, well, maybe I'll go on Weight Watchers. And they said, well, don't do that, Brooks. Go on myfitnesspal.com. I'm saying that slowly in case you want to write it down. myfitnesspal.com. It's free. So I went home, me and my wife registered on it. We have it on our computer, our iPad, our smartphones. And we began to exercise and being accountable for exercise, started watching our nutrition, being accountable for our nutrition. And a year later here, I weigh 65 pounds less, my wife weighs 48 pounds less. There was actually another couple that started at the same time, and they had very similar results. One day last week, all 4 of us were on elliptical machines next to each other, and we started adding up how much we'd lost. We've lost 190 pounds between the 4 of us, so actually the entire human being has disappeared from the face of the earth. What that is. Now I'm telling you that, one thing I feel good about it. I'll be honest with you, I feel much better, physically and spiritually and mentally. It gives me energy that I didn't have before. But what I'm really telling you that is because it would have been way easy to eat some fattening food along the way. Something that cookies Joyce brought in, or a pie that Joanne made, that would have been easy to do. Because I love food, so it would have been no problem eating that stuff. But I decided that I was going to be accountable and I was going to persevere. It would have been easy to say, I don't really feel like riding my bike 20 miles a day. I'd rather just lay around and watch TV, because this is way easier to do than this is. But I made myself a commitment and made myself accountable for it. I persevered. Now I understand it's a personal story. I'm not trying to reflect that out to you, but I just want to give you an idea of what perseverance looks like. In the coming year, I think we all always need to be thinking about how we can be accountable for our lives. Our physical self, our emotional self, and our spiritual self. And how it is as individual people of God and as a community of faith that we can encourage faithful discipleship. How we can see that in ourselves and share it with others to persevere. Believe this, my friends, that when God calls us to a task, whatever that mission may be, whatever that project He has laid out there, God will somehow give us the help to finish what God's plan is. Now, as I tie a knot into this narrative this morning, I want to take us back to the Magi, because I got to think, in a 2-year journey, they had plenty of opportunities to bail out on going to see the baby Jesus. If you're riding a camel for a couple of years, there have been plenty of times saying, this is really a bad idea, let's go home. Okay? Been a really good idea. And I gotta think that once they heard this information from King Herod, these are magi, these are intelligent people, right? They figured out what was going on. Herod wasn't going to go there and give honor to this baby. And we already all know that at that time, Herod had infants slaughtered all over the countryside. That would have been enough for me to say, I'm going back home. I'm out of here. But they didn't. They finished what it was they had set out to do. Now, I'm not sure why this group of Gentile magi from the east came so far to see a baby. And I'm not sure why their intentions that they had in getting there. And I'm not sure why it was so important for them to bring the gifts even, except for maybe that's a way of praising and worshiping God. But I do know that these Magi traveled for about 2 years to this Christmastide site. They persevered. Stick-withedness. That's probably not in the dictionary. Maybe in Wikipedia. But they persevered. They persevered. In our faith journey, in our life of Christians, can we do anything less? This is the Word of God, the people of God.
Praise be to God.